Well, welcome to the Plan Your Federal Retirement podcast. I'm your co-host, Micah Shalansky, and with me, as usual, the legendary Tammy Flanagan. How's it going, Tammy?
Hey, Micah. Well, it's really good to be back, and I'm glad we're doing this live today, so we might get to interact with some of our listeners, which is really exciting.
We love it. We'd love some more comments from you guys on the live podcast. What do you guys like? What other topics do you want us to cover? Go ahead and throw some stuff in the comment section as well. That's really going to help us. In the dozens of years Tammy and I have been doing interactions with federal employees, teaching classes, now doing podcasts, doing videos, etc. Your guys' comments really help direct us on the information that we need to provide. So we really do listen to those. So give us some comments, give us some questions. Feel free to stump us. We love learning new things, by the way. Tammy and I were just spending our idle time preparing for this, reading other OPM regs on things, because that's I guess how we geek out.
We do. We do that for fun. Yep.
Perfect. Well, Tammy, we're going to spend a little bit today on this live podcast really talking about burning your sick leave, pros and cons. And man, I hear a lot of different things, and I know you do as well, from our federal employee audience about some people are like, hey, I'm going on terminal leave. I'm going to burn everything, burn my annual leave. I'm going to burn my sick leave, which you can't do, and we're going to talk about that. I hear from other people that you should bank everything and you shouldn't take any leave, and every combination in between. And really, there's not a one size fit all, but there's a few things we really have to keep in mind to make sure you don't penalize your retirement for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I think if you can get away with it, which federal employees are pretty good about following the rules and not trying to get away with too much. But, the financial side of that question is if I could use up my annual leave and use up my sick leave to extend my service longer, that's the best way to do it. But we've got some rules that get in the way of that.
Mm-hmm. Tammy, let's kick it off a little bit. Let's talk first about, let's go over, and I know our listeners know this, so guys, appreciate your patience, let's go over how our pension works entirely. Let's talk about the service, let's talk about the high three, the pension computation, because that really kind of dictates how we're going to use leave or sick leave in that. Is that okay?
Yep. And can I show something on the screen? Because I can kind of walk us through this with a little visual.
Please hit the share screen.
Okay, I'm going to show you this right here, because this way, if I can walk you through this, you're going to see how sick leave actually is added in, because I get a lot of confusing questions on this. So how I set this up, see where it says retirement date?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if my retirement date, I'm just choosing the end of the year, because a lot of people like to retire at the end of the year so they can save up all the annual leave that they earned and everything they carried over from last year. And I know no one likes to retire in Alaska at the end of the year, but it is still a popular time to go. That's when OPM gets about 25% of the retirement applications that they're going to get for the entire year. They come at the end of the year, because I think it's this urban myth, partially, that at the end of the year is the magic date to retire. But I'm going to use that for this example, because it's an easy number to subtract from, is also a good thing here. Let's say this person's service computation date is July 15th, 1994. So what happens whenever you're retiring, we got to figure out exactly how much service you have. And then we add on the sick leave, because I always hear people saying about leftover days. So one of the components when we're trying to figure out how much our retirement's worth, we have three components. We have the high three average salary. That's a little easier to understand. We have, what I'm going to show you here is your length of service, which is where the sick leave factors in. And then you have the formula, and the formula couldn't be any easier. It's either 1% or 1.1%. But I want to show you this, and then we can go through the formula, kind of walk through that as well. So for this person here, they've got, if we subtract the days, the months, and the years, these two dates, we end up with 30 years, 5 months, and 6 days of service. And you might say, well, they're only going to get credit for 30 years and 5 months. Well, that's not true, because we haven't looked at their sick leave balance. We haven't projected their sick leave balance to the end of the year. So our sick leave is always expressed in hours, right? So if we look at a chart, we have these handy charts, and we've put this for you guys to download, I guess. Okay, so let's say this person in my example has, I don't know, let's make it 634 hours of sick leave, right? Now, if you look on the chart, you can see 632 hours, then you can see 638. This is a handy dandy chart that we use to convert hours of sick leave into months and days. Because if you notice here, 1 day is equal to 6 hours. And when we work a day, we're working 8 hours, right? So why is it only 6 hours equals a day? Well, that's because for retirement purposes, we count 30 days in a month. But when you work your federal job, you're working on average about 22 days a month. So what this chart is doing is taking out the weekends and holidays or adding them back in. That's why it's not an
Gotcha.
8-hour per day conversion, right? Okay, so what did I say? How much sick leave do we have? 634 hours. All right, so 632, 638, 634 is not on the chart. So when that happens, when your hours fall in between two numbers on the chart, you're going to go to the higher number. So 638, which would be 20 days. And if we go up to the months, that's 3 months and 20 days. So if I go back to my formula here, I can now add, what did I say? 634 hours, right? So I'll mark that here so I don't forget. 634 hours, that's 3 months and 20 days. And look at this, I've got a problem, don't I, Micah?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Just a little bit here. So I end up with 30 years, 8 months, and 26 days left
So
over.
close, but not enough.
Yeah, so can I round that up to another month since it's so close?
I like that option, but I don't think OPM's going to agree with that. They're going to go, no, you're going to lose those 26 days.
That's right. It's not going to work. So, a couple of things I could consider doing. I may not want to do this. One of the things I could consider doing would be to work a few more months so that I accrue more sick leave. So when I retire at the end of the month, I'm adding another 4 days onto that sick leave. But, hey, I've already worked 30 years. I don't really want to stay till June. I want to retire at the end of this year. So that may not work. So another thing people will do is they'll look at this and they'll say, oh, gee whiz, I don't want to give up or, lose that sick leave credit. So what they'll do is they'll go back to that chart. And if we go down the left-hand column of the chart and we find 26 days, here we go right here, 26 days. To the right of 26 days is 151 hours. Well, how many weeks is that, Mike? Almost 4 weeks? Yeah, so I may not get away with taking that much sick leave, but I do know that if I have a valid reason to use my sick leave, it's not going to hurt anything, is it? Because I have a lot of unused sick leave here that's not going to count for anything. That's really going to be lost, those 26 days. But don't take a whole month off, because if you do, you're going to lose that 8 months of service. So keep it at the 26 days, which is equivalent to, as I said here, 151 hours. So that's like less than 2 pay periods.
And Tammy, I think what I would be thinking about this too, where I think clients, sometimes federal employees make mistakes, is they want to get this down to a 0 number, right? I know you mentioned that before. I just want to pull on that thread a little bit more. They want to say, hey, Mike, I want to retire at 30 years, 8 months, and 0 days left over. I don't want to leave the government any of my money. Well, that kind of makes sense in concept, but you're risking a whole lot right here. And one of the things you might simply be risking is the different ways the computers calculate the days, months, and sick leave hours. And we've seen computers see different things where you might lose or gain a couple of days. So if you burn all of your sick leave days, let's say you had 1 left over in this calculation, OPM does the math, not you, and they come out with, you know what, you didn't actually have 26 days. You only had 24 days, but you burned 25. What does that mean? You're now in a deficit. Now you've lost an entire month, because now you're going to have 30 years, 7 months, and 29 days, and you've gone the wrong direction. So I advise extreme caution about trying to burn all of this leave and trying to game it a little too much.
Right, but look what I'm doing here, Micah. What I'm doing is changing my retirement date to January 11th, 2025. Now, for most federal employees, that's still within the 2024 leave year. Now, you and I both know, Micah, if I make my retirement effective January 11th, I'm not going to get paid any retirement benefit for the month of January. My retirement's not going to start till February. However, if I'm somebody with not a whole lot of service, maybe this person wouldn't want to do this because they've got over 30 years. But if I had 15 years or 20 years, and I'm in my 60s, I may go ahead and wait till January 11th, because then when I'm subtracting this out, what's 5 from 12 is 7. And then 1 from 3 is 2. So I've got 27 days of service now. Now when I add on the sick leave, I've got 47 days, and that's the same as 1 month and 17 days. So I've got my leftover sick leave down a little bit lower. So sometimes if you work with your retirement specialist, if you have a retirement specialist that you trust to work with, they can do these calculations for you, and they can help you decide, if this is a good idea or not. If this is something you might want to consider doing, is to change that date and how long would you have to work to make that another month. But really, Micah, the bottom line is this, right? If our high three salary is $100,000, let's make it that to make it easy to multiply by. And I've got, 30 years versus, let's say just 1 month of service, 1/12 of a year. What is that really worth, right? So $100,000 times, if I'm over 62, that would be at the 1.1% number, calculation factor divided by 12. That 1 month of service is worth about $92 a year. And that works out to be $7.60 a month. So is it really going to make that much difference if I gain or lose 1 month of sick leave? Kind of the bottom line in this.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? Is be careful about what we're gaming and what we're going to risk here, right? And so the math isn't quite straight 1 for 1. And then we have some rules with kind of burning our sick leave too. And I think one of the misconceptions that Tammy sometimes comes out, especially from my military retirees or people with prior military service, is they come in and they're like, hey, in the military, I would just go on terminal leave. I would just go burn all my annual leave or all my sick leave would all just be burned. I'd have a fixed retirement date. And if I had 3 months of leave, basically 3 months before I'd separate, I would just burn all of that. I could go get a second job. I could get pay and all those things would happen. And that's true under the military set uniform service. But in a civilian world, we don't have that same thing. There's no such thing as terminal leave. In fact, it's explicitly forbidden to go on terminal leave, right?
Right. Well, you mentioned 2 types of leave, Mike. You mentioned sick leave and annual leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So annual leave, let's put that aside for a minute. Let's talk about what you said about burning up my sick leave.
Sure.
You told me that you're retiring for health reasons, that you really can't come to work because you're physically ill or you've had an accident that's preventing you from coming to work. You most certainly can burn up your sick leave, and I would recommend that you do. You stay on the payroll as long as possible because you have a reason to use that sick leave. And one of the things that might happen is that maybe you really don't want to retire yet, but it's your health that's preventing you. So during that time you're using up the sick leave, you could recover. Maybe you could continue working a couple of more years if you feel well enough and you've recovered. So sick leave, if you have a reason to use it, certainly you can use it. That an employee is eligible to use entire amount of sick leave. I had an employee one time, he was 53 years old. He was going to retire under civil service when he was 55. And he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So, that diagnosis is one we never want to hear. So he came to me and he said, should I just go ahead and file for disability retirement? And I said to him, I said, no. I says, look at this balance. You've got over a year's worth of sick leave. You've been healthy up to this point, fortunately. So I said, you just go on sick leave. And when you feel well enough, you come to work. And when you're not well enough, you use that sick leave. He says, can I do that? Can I really take sick leave like that? I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. You're right. That's why you saved it in case you got sick. And so that's what he did. And while he was using the sick leave, he was earning more. And he stayed on the payroll. Unfortunately, he did pass away about 7 months later. But by doing that benefited his widow by extending the service that her survivor benefit was based on. It made her value of the life insurance he had provided for her more generous. So it was definitely worth doing that. But you can't just fully healthy go into your supervisor and say, hey, I'm going to be on sick leave for a year. I'll see you later, and then I'll bring in my application next year. That's not going to fly in most agencies.
And Tammy, I think with that one too, right? Not only did it help the survivor, it helped them while the 7 months he was alive, because going out on sick leave in that case and using that, I'm going to call it as a short-term disability policy, because that's how I view it from the financial planning side, is especially when you have a career, you should have enough sick leave that if something happens, you can keep that cash flow coming in. So he was able to maintain his cash flow for his household for that 7 months until he passed. If he would have gone out on a disability retirement, he would be getting less than his paycheck is going to be.
Absolutely. That's what I tell, if anyone's listening who is mid-career, early career, do not use your sick leave unless you have to use it, because it absolutely is short-term disability insurance. I don't say save your sick leave because you might get credit for retirement. You just saw that it's worth about $7 a month, even with a pretty decent high 3. But it is worth gold if you're sick, because nothing worse than having to come to work when you're not really ready to recover yet. You're not fully recovered and you have to struggle through the day because you don't have any sick leave and you're facing leave without pay. or disability if you even qualify, because the disability is only available if you're going to be out of work for a year or permanently. So yeah, sick leave is really valuable in terms of being short-term disability protection. That's really its purpose.
And then let's say that you didn't need it, right? You grew that, which is great. You had that short-term, I'm going to call it, it's not really, but short-term disability, right? You had your sick leave there to protect you, which is fantastic, but you didn't need it. And now you're in the stage that you have this sick leave left over. Tammy, again, I want to pull on that thread that you said. If there's ever a possibility to extend your retirement date by using up some of your leave, whether annual or sick, we can talk about them differently. That's a great option. So whether it's FMLA, I've seen clients use it in that case as well, taking care of a loved one that has a medical thing and says, Mike, I'm going to retire. It's kind of the same question. She had almost a year of sick leave. I was like, don't retire. Just go on there. Let's start using that sick leave as much as we can. And when it comes to a point we can't use that anymore, now we can have a conversation about retiring and filling in retirement paperwork. So there's more creative options that's still within the rules, right? We're not saying go around the rules. We're not saying lie or do anything else, but there's lots of things that you can do inside of those rules to potentially use some of that sick leave while you're working to extend that retirement date. And it's more beneficial for you.
Yeah, because how many times have you heard somebody say, I'm retiring because my parents are older, they need me to take them to the doctors, they need me to be there as a caregiver. Those are valid reasons for FMLA, the Family Medical and Leave Act. So yeah, take advantage of those things. And that might allow you to stay on the payroll longer, contribute to the TSP longer, and extend your retirement benefit. But then it comes to annual leave, right? So we've got, 300 hours of annual leave. And I always get the question, as you do as well, why don't I just go on annual leave until it's gone? And while I'm on annual leave, I'm going to earn more leave. So it's going to last even longer.
Right.
Which is a great idea. I love that idea. You can put money in the thrift. You're going to have more Social Security benefit, by virtue of those wages. The problem is we got to go back to 1945, because in 1945 there was a Comptroller General's decision that still holds today. That says if you went into your supervisor saying, "Hey, I'm going to just use up my leave, and when it's all gone, I'm going to bring in my retirement application." We do call that terminal leave, but we don't have such a thing in the federal civilian government. So your supervisor could very clearly deny you that leave. Now, that's not to say you can't take a day here and a day there, a couple of weeks, vacation to get you through to retirement. That's fine. But just to go in and say, hey, I'm going to use up this leave, and when it's gone, make my retirement effective, that generally won't fly. I'll never say never or always in this business, but generally that would not fly.
Yeah, that's not the common practice. That's not what we see happening. So it's something to be careful of. And then Tammy, again, I like what you said. Sometimes there's conversations we have with clients that they're eligible to retire now. Their agency would like to keep them on to help finish a project or do something else. I'm like, hey, this is a great opportunity to go talk to your supervisor and be like, hey, got to meet me halfway. I'd like some leave without pay, depending if they're in the cash flow situation. I've had clients take leave without pay and a combination of leave. And what happens is they can stay on with the agency in order to help get something done, but they're taking a little bit more free time now. So there's a little bit of wiggle room between these. It's not just all an all or nothing kind of thing.
Yeah. It also could be a situation where you could come back as a reemployed annuitant if the agency needs you to finish a project, or there's some reason to keep you in particular on the payroll. So a lot of agencies can get the authority to bring that employee back as an annuitant, pay them the same salary, and collect your retirement. So there are there is some flexibility in things you can do when you're ready to retire, but your agency may not be ready for you to leave. So definitely discuss these things with your supervisor. If you have a retirement specialist, you can talk these things over with them, because they've got the rule book, they got the playbook that they can tell you what you can and what you cannot do. So take advantage of any resources that are available to you.
I like it. Now, Tammy, how does the annual leave get cashed out? Right. So, you're going to retire, let's say 12/31 as your retirement date. You went over with 300 hours. That's going to be cashed out. What does that look like?
Yeah. So initially, I get questions about this all the time. So you get your 300 hours to leave, and let's say we'll just use the 100,000 as my pay rate. So at the time I retire, my salary is 100,000 a year. I got to divide that by 2,087 hours. Why? Because 2,087 hours is how many work hours are in a year. So that means that $100,000 annual pay rate comes out to about $48 an hour. So I got my 300 hours of annual leave times $48 an hour. That's a check, $14,400 gross, not net, because what's going to come out of that check? Taxes. That's it. But that's federal tax, state tax, if you have a state tax, Medicare tax, and FICA tax. So look at about maybe 70% of that actually going into your bank account. So for some people, higher salary, it's even less. For lower salaried employees, it might be a little closer to 80%. But yeah, you're going to pay all those taxes first. But there's no retirement deducted. You cannot contribute to the TSP out of it. There's no insurance premiums coming out of that. So it is a lump sum payment that is taxable. Now, the other thing that happens at the end of the year, you go into January 12th, and that's when the new leave year starts for most employees. And that's also the date that the new pay increase takes effect if there's a general schedule pay adjustment, which in most years there is. So if your salary went up 5% on January 12th, even though you've already left, that's going to be an increase of $5,000 a year to your salary. So divide that by 2087, and that comes out to about $2.40. So any of that leave that would have went beyond January 12th, if you could have used it up and stayed on the payroll, will be worth another $2.40 an hour more.
Nice.
Now what happens? Yeah, isn't that nice? So, but what happens is initially, because payroll hasn't updated the system yet to reflect that pay increase when you retire December 31st, they're going to pay it to you at your current pay rate. And I get emails at the end of January saying, you were wrong. They didn't pay me the higher amount. I said, just wait. So once they update the payroll system, then you'll get a check for a couple $100 that represents that additional pay at the new rate for those hours that went beyond that date. So it's a little complicated, but it's nice that it is paid at the rate you would have earned if you could have used it up. So they will pay you at that rate. You just won't earn any additional leave.
And that's more than fair, right? So that works out pretty well, which I like. A couple of things that come up from that as well, Tammy, is number one, generally, as you point out, a healthy portion is withheld from taxes. And so people come up and they think too much money was withheld from taxes. And potentially that is the case. Most of the time it's not, but that could be. So it's always a good thing whenever you have those big tax withholdings, look at your income for the year with your retirement. How much tax is withheld from your pension? How much was withheld from your last paycheck, right? We always, when clients retire, we always want to get a copy of their last paycheck in February. Why do I want the one in February? In case there was an adjustment, right? If I get the from January, that doesn't work out too well. So I want the February one that shows everything that kind of came in and how much taxes were withheld to make sure you're on track. But Tammy, as you know, that also counts as earned income. So even though I retired last year, because I got a paycheck for this year, it's an earned income. That means I get to contribute again to my Roth account. If my wife is retired, but I had enough income for her and I can make a contribution for both of us into our IRAs or our Roth IRAs account. So it's kind of our last year for going into retirement to make an additional contribution, which can be nice.
Yeah, but keep in mind, that's not TSP. But
yes, thank you.
Individual retirement arrangement for sure. And that's certainly a good thing to do with that money. However, you may want to wait a little while to put the money in that IRA because it may take several months before you see money coming from OPM. Even when you do start seeing money coming from OPM, it's going to be a smaller amount than you were expecting in most cases for a couple of months. So use that annual leave check to kind of tide you over while you're waiting. That's a lot of times why people save up their leave so that they have a little cushion of cash that maybe they didn't have in the bank beforehand.
And we just recorded a whole podcast on that, and that's going to drop in a couple of weeks. So make sure you stay tuned for that. It's like before the retirement, what do you need to do during retirement, right after it kind of goes through what takes place and what does that transition look like? And then we talk about the the OPM disagrees with your retirement that you think it should be. And what do we do in that case? So a lot of great information is going to be coming out on that too, which is fantastic. All right, Tammy. Well, this podcast is all about our action items and things that come up. So what's the first action item that we could kind of talk about for our listeners, something they could implement this week?
Well, again, understand the purpose of annual leave and sick leave. Sick leave is truly short-term disability protection. Long-term disability protection is retirement. So, save that sick leave if you're younger, if you're mid-career, then start to understand how it works with retirement in mind as you get closer.
I love it. And I'm going to say the biggest thing is this is where estimates are really, really helpful, and plan on a cushion with your sick leave. Don't plan on burning it all. Make sure we have that short-term disability, that short-term insurance, which is great mid-career. Then let's start talking about an exit plan. Which is the best way to use that sick leave in retirement? Sometimes it's mental health days, kind of stretching out our leave a little bit. Sometimes it's other things, but let's make sure we have that plan.
That's a good advice. I believe that's perfect.
Well, Tammy, I kind of forgot that it was the live. I apologize, but I'm looking over here and we do have a couple of questions. You want to hang out just for a minute?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. We're just going to grab a couple of these. All right. Someone writes in and says, what if I have 25 years of federal service? I'm 42 and I have a ton of sick leave, but will separate in the next few years for a new career. So I'm assuming they're saying, what happens to my sick leave?
Yeah, they're going to lose it. They're going to lose it. The only way you can add sick leave on to a postponed retirement is if you separate when you're at the minimum retirement age, which is 57 for most of our listeners. So if you left in your 40s or 50 years old, that sick leave will be forfeited. It does not count towards a deferred retirement unless you come back to work. Let's say the grass isn't greener on the other side and you come back to federal service, you'll have that sick leave balance reinstated.
Yep. And that would be a slightly different answer too if you were special provisions and had 25 years of service and for the immediate retirement, right? A lot of things we don't know by these questions. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, fantastic. When doing a postponed retirement, is the annual lump sum paid out when you separate from service or when you start collecting your pension?
Oh, okay. Great question. So your annual leave is paid by your payroll office. So your payroll office has to separate you when you resign or retire. So in the case of a postponed retirement, you're actually resigning and you're going to apply for the retirement later. So you'll get your annual leave lump sum payment shortly after you separate. The only thing you're going to do later is file the application for retirement with OPM directly. Your agency won't have anything to do with that, which means make sure you have all of the information you need from your agency before you leave. Make copies of your personnel file. I would even go so far as to fill out that postponed application so you understand what needs to go on there, because you may have some questions. Don't send it in yet, but fill it out.
Boy, and I'm going to add one on there too, and I'm not trying to solicit service at all. Go hire someone to review that postponed retirement application that knows what they're talking about. Tammy and I have really seen a lot of errors with those that have very costly mistakes. I got to say, Tammy, that is a very confusing retirement form from not what the instructions say. It's pretty clear, but what you're actually supposed to put on there doesn't exactly clearly line up, in my opinion, with what those.
It can cost you health insurance. It can cost you several years of benefits. We did cover this in a podcast not too long ago. Mm-hmm. So you might want to go back and look at that podcast.
Okay, perfect. Well, guys, listeners, thank you so much for tuning into this. We really enjoy doing the live. Again, give us some more comments, topics, and things you would like us to cover. We would love that. Tammy, thank you so much again for being here. And until next time, happy planning.